afternoon, welcome to the UK Column Live. It's the 14th of January 2014 and it's 4 minutes past 1. Sorry about the delay. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson are here in Plymouth. And we have a guest on the phone, Pippa King, and she's going to be discussing RFIDs in schools, biometrics and the Internet of Everything. So she'll be coming out towards the end of the show. Bit cold.
It is a bit cold. Well, the weather forecast we gave yesterday was pretty reasonable, actually, because we did have further showers during the day, but the temperature dropped overnight, and we had some localised frost around the Plymouth area, so it's been pretty chilly. Bit of blue sky this morning. It's now greying over, and we're expecting more showers a bit later. So that's the forecast, really.
Thanks.
More showers.
Apparently being
Briggs. And
any of the show.
Yeah, they have. Okay, go.
all right, I'll just run into this story again. The Mirror reporting that Army top brass have been telling soldiers to fire less bullets on training exercises to save money. What they're really saying is that instead of firing off unspent rounds at the end of a training exercise, those rounds should be returned to the armoury. And this is going to save the military money. So we thought we'd put this into perspective. Let's have a look at the common sense.
Sorry, Brian, it's just not happening. It's just not happening. YouTube is not receiving. We are sending it out, but it's not. It's not done. I don't think it's a problem here. I think it's a problem with YouTube. But let's just.
Right, okay, I think we are coming back on stream, so we'll see whether we can get that article up again and we'll resume the news. Okay, at the moment I've got nothing on my middle screen, Mike. Okay, there we go. Right, here we are. The Mirror story, Army top brass telling soldiers to fire less bullets on training exercises to save money. Now, the meat of this story was that soldiers are being, instead of firing off unspent rounds at the end of an exercise, they're being told to bring them back to the armoury. Now, I understand a bit of this because that can take up a lot of time and effort as opposed to firing off relatively cheap rounds. But here is the finger pointed, of course, at the troops who are going to go out there in the front line doing the job and putting their lives at risk. So let's have a look at the background. Let's have a look at the common sense aspect of what we're being told really in this story. Well, the Telegraph here picking up that the MOD had spent 66 million on consultants as the armed forces were cut. Let's put that one in its place. We had this one here. The Ministry of Defence wasted millions on failed computer systems. Defence Secretary may spend 50 million on a new solution after delay in Army's 1.3 billion online recruitment scheme. And we'll come back to that nonsense in a minute. And let's have a look at the other one. Well, here he was, Mod Mandarin, Andrew Manley, enjoying a good time. Something to do with his secretary, which you can see a lovely picture of the lovely Laura. What we're talking about, he's being paid £200,000 a year, but £5,500 hotel bills, part of 180 million spent by the MOD on hotels and car hire for top staff. So if we put these things into context, we're seeing absolute nonsense here. With this article, and of course this is what the government is trying to do to the population at the moment, is simply lose us in what is Alice in Wonderland defence policy. So the soldiers out there on the ground risking their lives. I've just got a couple more to add to that one, Mike. So they're out on the ground doing the job. Meanwhile, we've got some guy being paid 200,000 to have champagne with his secretary. Who is responsible for this? Well, at the end of the day, we come back to the people in Westminster. This is not an accident. We're dealing with individuals like Philip Hammond, David Cameron, the rest of them. These people, utter traitors to the country. This is not an accident. But of course, what's happening here? We've now got the armed forces saying that they've now got a lot of people leaving. Well, why are they leaving? Because this is the policy. The government messing up the armed forces for the army, getting rid of the regimental system, getting rid of the experienced people. This is to reduce Britain's military defence capacity to nothing so that we're reliant on France and the European Union. So what we're looking at is an attack on people's minds. But if you look through it, you can see that this cannot be accidental, what's happening. No. What we've got is common purpose at work and common sense thrown out the window. And of course, the similar sort of chaos is happening in other areas. So we've got mental institutions with problems here.
This Mirror story, after having a breakdown following a 10-year abusive relationship. She was told by doctors at the hospital she would be sectioned if she tried to leave. She was speaking on BBC4 where she revealed that she was raped 60 plus times by a senior care worker. She tells the Victoria Derbyshire show how she was preyed on for a year by a senior member of staff. She said she was raped by this man up to 60 times and caught an STD as well. Asked if the hospital staff knew about what was going on, she said she suspected so. But Kent and Medway NHS Trust paid Catherine £100,000. The care worker was just given a 12-month sentence, suspended for 2 years, and told that he would never work with vulnerable people again. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing that we've got to point out here is we know that Britain's psychiatric system is effectively being used as a gulag. Yeah. We've got particularly mothers who are being sectioned on a pack of lies in order to take their children away by social services. Incident occurred in the last few days of a fire in the kitchen of a mother in London. Not only was she and her daughter arrested and held in prison cells for at least 12 hours, but subsequent to that, and the fire no fault of her own, it appears to be likely to be the result of damp and electrical systems in a damp flat. But as a result of the whole incident, she's now being chased by social services, trying to brand her as mentally ill and get her sectioned. So the reality of what's going on in the mental homes here, very, very serious. Savile, of course, was operating in this area. Yeah. Vulnerable people for rape, abuse. Yeah, exactly. Very, very serious. It's the Gulag system, which we've seen in dictatorships. And on the forum, somebody is saying, well, UK column can be pretty depressing. And our response to that is, we are talking the reality of what's actually happening in UK at the moment. If you believe that the reality around you is depressing, you're quite right. But how are we going to correct it? The only way we can deal with it is to make sure the people who are still asleep on on their sofas in front of the TV understand what's building.
Yeah.
Sorry if we're getting a bit tough these days, but...
Sorry, just to jump in, but it looks like they're saying in the chat room we seem to be under a DDoS attack.
Well...
Mike, are we okay?
No, we've just got a streaming problem, so hopefully it'll stay with us. Well, if we stay with the NHS, this was yet another tragic story from the Express of a little boy who's died in hospital, supposedly recovering from heart surgery, but he was found desperately dehydrated, a whole series of mistakes and things, and this is yet another tragic case. Now, is this simply that the NHS has become incompetent? He was so thirsty, he was sucking from wet wipes in the hospital. It's absolutely tragic. Is this just incompetence? I don't think so. What we've got is a decline in the overall performance of the NHS ever since the change management structures went in. But let's remind ourselves what Ken Clarke has been doing. He's been off talking to the Chinese, saying that we should saying they should buy British healthcare. And this is what I'm going to say. I think the reality is the NHS is being privatised for maximum profit, and really anybody who goes into the NHS now is effectively a Ken Clarke type guinea pig. This is the reality of what's going on.
I do have a question though. If this little boy was in hospital and he was just come out of an operation, surely his parents would have been with him.
They were, and
why could they not just go and get him some water?
Well, because initially he was in intensive care. He was in a very delicate state, and then he was moved on to a normal ward.
Right.
And there were a whole series of problems, and it's quite clear that parents were doing everything they could to get the hospital to react.
I suppose they trust what the hospital is saying, aren't they? If they say don't.
Well, this is very common, of course. People rely on the doctors, and they rely on the nurses, they rely on the management structure of the hospital. But as we know from personal experience and other people who are contacting us, that there is a deep malaise in the NHS, which has been introduced ever since we've seen these high-level common purpose type change management programs. So there we have it. Ken Clarke wants to export our NHS expertise to the Chinese. Well, as it appears here, the BBC pointing out that actually Chinese doctors have been, this particular lady, jailed for selling babies to traffickers. And I thought this was particularly interesting if we put it against common sense background here. So what's happening in UK? We've got the Mail talking about children being stolen by the British state, causing utter misery in one of Britain's most disturbing scandals. We've got another internet report of course, the lady being sedated and the child taken from her womb. Chinese China contracts. Then The Guardian pointing out here that there's a little bit of protectionism going on inside China at the moment because the Chinese army has been banned from buying foreign cars. Luckily, I believe it's Volkswagen and Audi who are taking the biggest hit. But nevertheless, we're seeing the start of dual standards. When there's a problem inside China, they're going to move quite rightly to protectionism to protect their own interests. Meanwhile, David Cameron is selling off Britain to the Chinese. Now, this one's quite interesting. The Guardian here pointing out that UK police have arrested 2 men on suspicion of terrorist offences in Syria. They're aged 21, so basically we're dealing effectively, I'm going to call them teenagers, but these men are not connected with any violence in UK, but apparently the police want to know what they've been up to in Syria. Well, you know, we can arrest a couple of teenagers, but not Blair, Brown, Miliband, Clegg and Cameron for creating the unlawful wars. But look how cynically the establishment is using Syria, because the EU now saying, well, OK, we've got all these refugees, it's up to us, the EU and Britain, to open doors to bring these people in. So not only, I'm going to stick on Cameron, not only does Cameron help create this violence and devastation overseas, Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria. Now the victims are used to promote this European social policy. It's quite disgusting to watch. The solution is so easy. We have to replace these despicable MPs of all parties in Westminster. It can be done, I think. Well, of course, the EU is crowing at the moment as Scotland tries to move towards, well, independence as a vassal state within the EU. And the Scottish Express here is a bit upset, I think, because it says that Scotland will miss out on fracking payouts. Now, of course, Mike has covered this in quite some detail, as has Ian Crane on his
Fracking
Nightmare programme. But the interesting thing is the little bit of subheadline here: Scottish local authorities will miss out on millions of pounds because of Alex Salmond's obsession with wind and wave power. And I think this leads on very nicely to you, Mike, because you've been having a look at the performance of wind power, I believe.
Right, so it's really quite amusing because Scotland is really geared up to use wind power exclusively, and we know that last winter, for example, they had to import quite a lot of energy because of days like today. So this is the wind generation capability in the UK, which is 10 gigawatts, and this is the 14th of January 2014. And in fact, wind power infrastructure today is generating 770 megawatts when I looked at midday. So give or take a few megawatts. Today is not windy enough to actually generate anything, and Scotland last winter found quite long periods of cold, calm weather where it was just like today, freezing in the mornings when they got up, and in fact, when they needed the energy most, it wasn't available. So, they may not be getting their payoffs for fracking. They don't necessarily want that, but they don't want wind power either because it isn't going to generate any wind power. Today, the UK as a whole is importing, I think, 2 gigawatts from France and another gigawatt from the Netherlands because we can't generate enough energy to meet our needs for the day. So that was at midday today. So, that's the UK as a whole. Probably Scotland is the main importer.
Yep. So we've got the country now dependent on power supplies from overseas countries. We've got our military dependent on overseas countries. So the ground being cut out from under us.
Well, remember what we were talking about last week, the Lima Declaration, the requirement that Western developed countries become interdependent, no independence, all interdependence, and this is part and parcel of that policy.
Yeah, indeed. Plus open border policy under the Schengen Agreement. So if we just summarise that, though, Mike, the good news is that British Wind Energy is powering the UK column studios today, just about.
Just about, I think, yeah. Just 770 megawatts, just about enough to cover.
Is that why we're having technical difficulties here?
Yeah, because the wind isn't blowing hard enough.
Yeah, well, that is serious, of course, but some people say that we should also be smiling while we give you all this bad news. We're happy to do that. Great story here, brilliant. 2 businessmen have been jailed for 7 years, after a court hears that they were the masterminds and architects behind a scheme to print money. So these 2 men picked up by the police. The police have been very, very efficient, and they've been found guilty of printing money, and they've gone to prison for 7 years. Well, this is very interesting because back in March 2013, the BBC and many other people were talking about the Bank of England printing, I think the figure is about £375 billion of money. And Mervyn King at the time wanted to increase the so-called print of money above 375 billion at the time. So I don't know, I'm a bit confused about this. It's okay to print money as long as the banks create the money from nothing, but if you get out there and print the money from nothing, that's a crime and we're going to put you in prison.
Okay, so I'm going to go off on a total... So a man goes around preying on vulnerable women and gets a 12-month sentence, suspended for 2 years. Okay, so he's abusing women and the vulnerable, doesn't get any prison sentence. Someone's printing money and they get 7 years. Hello?
Yeah, now this makes sense because, of course, the reason they say these men were so dangerous is that if they produced money out of nothing, they could destabilise the whole of the monetary supply system. Yeah, absolutely. This is what the article said.
Okay.
These men were so dangerous that against the background of 375 billion printed out of nothing by the Bank of England, the fact that they'd churned out 1.3 million of fake money meant they should be jailed. I just wanted to add a bit to that graphic there, Mike, which was really this. If we want to sort this mess out, of course, yeah, if people counterfeit money, they shouldn't. But if we want to sort this mess out, we've got to get rid of the fraudulent, corrupt, criminal bankers. And we know what the solution is. It's the Bradbury pound. It's been done before. So tell us a bit more about banking reform then, Mike.
Well, before Christmas, I think it was the 18th of December, I mentioned the Banking Reform Act, which had just received its royal assent. And I pointed out that despite the suggestion of the mainstream press that, and in fact the government here, this is a little snapshot from a Treasury infographic, that the new act represented the separation of retail and investment banking. In reality, it didn't, and in fact it doesn't represent that at all. What has been done, as we mentioned before, is that some primary legislation has been put in place in order to grab the headlines, and now begins the process of lobbying by the banks to poke some holes in the supposed ring fence that the Act creates. They also said, of course, that banks are, if a bank fails as investors, it'll be made to pay. They're sort of pointing out the bail-in policy. That's just as an aside. But just as a reminder that we don't live in a democracy, the lobbying that the banks are in the process of doing at the moment is going to result in a tranche of so-called secondary legislation that no doubt will never see the light of day in the mainstream media. The secondary legislation mainly takes the form of statutory instruments, and a statutory instrument generally is created as an order of the Council, and that's the Privy Council, of course. The Privy Council, that unelected body of right honourables that only need a quorum of 3 to pass whatever order they feel like passing, and they've got the Right Honourable Nick Clegg there as their president. What a nice guy. So in the case of the Banking Reform Act, the draft secondary legislation includes 2 orders of the Privy, and these are them. These are the 2 ones that are of note anyway. The ring-fenced bodies and core activities order, which sets the scope of the ring fence, including a threshold below which institutions will be exempted from ring fencing, but also creates exemptions which allow larger organisations and so-called high net worth individuals to hold assets outside of the ring fence. So this is all about exemptions. And also the excluded activities and prohibitions order, which will be another piece of secondary legislation from the Privy, which defines a range of activities which are not permitted within the ring fence, but then goes ahead and creates a bunch of exemptions, including permitting ring fence banks to sell simple derivatives and to enable them to manage their own risk. So the Banking Reform Act does nothing in reality to deal with Britain's banking problems, including the amount of sort of alleged money that's being printed. But what about internationally then? Outside of national legislation, banking regulation is managed by the central banking system and a system of private central banks with names like the Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Federal Reserve and so on. They imply that there's something to do with countries, but of course they're not. And central banks are overseen by the central bankers, central bank, which is the Bank for International Settlements. And here's their website with a nice red eye in the top left-hand corner, as you can see. And on Sunday past there, the Bank for International Settlements group of central bank governors and heads of supervision, so that's the group of central bank governors and heads of supervision, they endorsed a new leverage ration framework, which is imposed allegedly under the Basel III banking regulations. Basel III, which is also known as the Third Basel Accord. It's supposedly a voluntary regulatory standard. So the banks allegedly volunteer or consent to take part in it. And among other things, it's supposed to define capital requirements for banks and set a minimum leverage ratio. Now, leverage, of course, might be described as indebtedness. So if you've got £1 of capital that you want to invest on the markets, and you at present they would probably try to invest £35, so that gives them a leverage on that pound. So if they ever have to pay that £35 back, well, they don't have it. Now, that's been going on since 2004. Before 2004, that leverage ratio was 12 to 1, so £12 in debt for every £1 of capital. And there's been pressure building for a return to the 12 to 1 ratio. But of course, naturally enough, as the FT recently reported, that has met, quote, ferocious resistance from the banks. So the reason the banks are determined that the leverage ratio should not be changed, of course, is that they are presently insolvent, and if they have to reduce their leverage ratio, that would mean that they would have to reduce their size as banks. So, in other words, they have to be a bit smaller than too big to fail. And of course, the other reason is that they can't actually raise any capital at the moment, so they can't meet a smaller leverage ratio. So the banks have nowhere left to run. The markets are, as has been reported here by Goldman Sachs yesterday, completely overvalued. So a correction is on the way. The banks have demonstrated that they can't regulate themselves through the Bank for International Settlements because they're fighting any pressure to regulate themselves. And they continue to demonstrate that they will not be regulated by national governments. And that is demonstrated by their lobbying over the Banking Reform Act. And also, the amount of lobbying and the amount of really vitriolic lobbying in the United States over the press for Glass-Steagall over there. And so, Brian, you've rightly mentioned the Bradbury Pound, but actually, without banking separation, the Bradbury Pound only solves one of the two major problems that we have. It solves the economic problem. It would help us get out of the economic problems that we have, but it won't solve the banking financial problems, and they're still too big to fail. They need to be dealt with urgently. And really, I would say that our MPs should be getting pretty bored of hearing us phone them up or write to them on this issue. And the banks need to be dealt with. They need to be split up. They need to be smaller organisations that can fail without consequences to the economy as a whole.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also just say to people that don't be fooled by this business of contact your MP. MPs' lives was just a daily bombardment of emails, tweets, letters, visits, and queues of people outside their surgeries. It brings with it immense pressure, of course. So it's a scale of the thing which produces the result. But certainly don't think that if every MP knew that he had a few thousand people in his constituency on his back every day, I don't think they'd be sleeping so well. And maybe they'd refocus away from acting lessons onto reality lessons. Mike?
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat box saying most bankers are leveraged up to 100 to 1. Of course, there's a difference between people that are playing on the markets with other people's money and the banks themselves as organisations. So individual traders may play in the markets with ridiculously high leverage, and we have mentioned that before, but the banks as institutions are required to have the 35 to 1 leverage ratio that they have at the moment.
Right. Okay, thanks for that.
I think we should get Alessia Rastani on actually one day and have a chat with Mike about stock market
financial things. Yeah. We'll see what we can do. Well, before we forget him, of course, Red Ed is hiding in the background. He's a typical Marxist because, of course, he lives in luxury. He's had a privileged upbringing. And I'd just like to put up the title of a little book written by a man in America, You Can Trust the Communists to Be Communists. So let us remember, of course, that it was the international bankers who were behind the Bolshevik Revolution. And, of course, it was the very same international bankers who were busy paying for the study and tremendous works of Karl Marx. So don't be fooled as to where the problem lies. Follow the money, and we're going to get pretty close to where the seat of the problem is. Let's jump overseas to Israel.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I know Pippa's been waiting on the line. Okay, between 1999 and 2005, Israel signed up 716 soldiers to an anthrax vaccine trial. The OMA trial, which is estimated to have cost $200 million, funded primarily by the United States forces. 92 of the 716 Israeli defence soldiers later complained that they were pressured into this experiment, were not informed about the risks. They say they have developed Crohn's disease, epilepsy, thyroid problems, pneumonia, kidney failure as a result of these vaccines. The Israeli government has not accepted legal responsibility, but has paid the 92 $10,000 each, and the rest of the participants $7,500. So more stories, but the whole anthrax thing. I thought that was all done back in the sort of 70s. The anthrax vaccine trials.
Well, there were a lot of tests, and I can't remember the name of the island, but a small island off UK was used for anthrax trials. So it's very interesting to see Israeli government, in this case, coming unstuck, but of course British and American governments also come unstuck about what's been pumped into troops, particularly via prior to the Iraq War. Well, if you're going to build a dictatorship, you need a propaganda machine. This is a very interesting story in the Mail, which is saying that Coronation Street actress, can I read her name? Julia Hesmonde, I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't watch it myself. But what we're seeing is the introduction of political agendas, in this case for assisted suicide. This is all being drifted into the soaps. So these are not entertainment. These are not to relax people and take their minds off what's going on. This is blatant propaganda where a government agenda is being put in these sorts of programs. Well, the Mirror here coming in from a different direction. While we know the quality of programmes, particularly on the BBC, has dropped to just the pits, the movie chiefs, we'll have to have a look at who these chiefs are, said they're going to crack down on sex and gore in films after a public consultation. And they're saying that we're all very confused about whether something is good or bad. So they're going to tell us what's good or bad. Do I believe these people are going to have a crackdown? Not at all. Coming at the different direction here, we've got Call the Midwife. Now, this is a programme which is apparently going from strength to strength. It's got a good historic storyline. It's about people in general doing the right thing. It's about midwives doing a very good job in difficult circumstances. And what's the media doing at the moment? Asking a question which doesn't need to be asked, which is, why is there a lack of raunchy scenes? But I'm glad to say that the people who've produced it have seen through this and said, well, people are watching this. I think the figure was 11 million, and it's increasing because they find it good, appropriate entertainment, which is taking their minds off things. So it can be done. And I'm getting there for you. We're running a bit late. We're heading towards a dictatorship. We've shown this slide before. But the subject is North Korea. Now, remember here we were showing that David Cameron was rewriting history by deleting the Tory website in the same way that the North Korean leader was doing it. But what about this for a headline? We are going to export Doctor Who, the Teletubbies and EastEnders to North Korea. Now, that's a pretty interesting situation, isn't it? But let's have a look at what's going on here. Because in the article were some very, very fascinating comments. A source at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office told the Sunday Times that the programmes could be shown to open people's eyes without upsetting the Korean regime. I've always believed that what brought down the Berlin Wall was not highbrow diplomacy, but Dallas and dynasty, a senior Foreign and Commonwealth Office source said. Now, these people are not joking. What they're talking about is the ability of this very insidious, dangerous media to undermine the strength of a nation state. Have a look at this one. Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Sir Richard Ottaway said this is a good use of British soft power. Now, remember that we've been warning about BBC Media Action, the so-called charity that in fact is peddling the BBC in unstable countries. And here is our own Foreign Commonwealth Office committee talking about British soft power. Mike?
Yeah, this is a pure admission of the propaganda value of that type of programming, isn't it?
Very dangerous stuff, and people really don't understand what they're watching. Well, what's the BBC got to say? Here they are, BBC Worldwide. Work remains ongoing on a possible initiative to supply a range of, here's the words, high-quality BBC programmes. Yeah?
Sorry.
I mean, we're laughing, but this is very, very serious stuff. Now we're getting into how you build a dictatorship. You must control the media. You must control people's minds. And onto the internet.
Okay, child tracking wristbands are edges closest to a dystopian future, and I never did look that up, what that meant.
It was
but
an unpleasant sort of dictatorship type future, I think the word means. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's been called a KMS wristband, apparently designed for children and the elderly. A phone and sensor are used to alert parents and schools of a child's whereabouts. Network has all the this network has all the personal details, including a physical description, address, relatives, health professionals, health indicators, and social media profiles. So, say for instance, if I wore one and it knew that I had a nut allergy and I went into a shop to purchase another item, it would alert me and my, if I was a child, my parents or whoever at the other end, and the network and database that I have a nut allergy and deter me not to buy it. But I think now is a good time we bring Pippa King in, because this is just such a small part of what is going on altogether. Pippa, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
That's absolutely fine.
So what's going on? You and I have been chatting, more over the last week or so with regards to this Internet of Everything and the RFIDs in schools and these wristbands. What's going on, Pippa?
Well, in the States, they've been tracking children with RFID for the past few years. And obviously my speciality is biometrics. And when the law came in September, where parents had to consent for their children's biometrics to be on computers, I thought, that technology isn't going to be 100% take-up. In order to get a technology to be worthwhile and efficient, you need 100% take-up. And now I don't think biometrics is. So I was sort of thinking, I wonder if RFID will turn up in UK schools. And I had a search and found that there was a college in Cheshire, 14 to 19-year-old college, that had put active RFID tags in lanyards around their students' necks for registration purposes. I wasn't aware, and I couldn't find out through the Freedom of Information that any consent had been sought from the students or the parents. All the college could say was that they'd informed the students on enrolment. Quite what they couldn't say, because there was no paperwork. How they informed them, I'm presuming, is verbally, and I think the college did sort of say it was a verbal informing that they were to wear these tags. Now, I think when you mention RFID, you think of contactless payment cards and Oyster cards, and that type of RFID is passive, so it's not emitting a frequency at all until it comes near a reader. Active RFID is essentially you becoming an antenna, so you are constantly emitting a frequency, and not explaining the technology properly doesn't arm you with the information to say yes or no, because people, probably yourself and other people, are carrying around in their wallets little passive chips in their cards to pay for things, but an active chip is completely different. And basically the college was sitting and looking at a computer screen, the blueprint of the college, and watching the pupils move around as little green blobs on the screen in real time. These active RFID chips were pulsing at every second for a range of 100 metres, which is 300 feet around each child. So even if you had a student that went to college and you didn't want it to wear an RFID chip, it would be sat next to a pupil less than a foot away that would be wearing a chip, and another pupil. And where do you then sort of say, I don't consent to being bathed in these frequencies? Yeah. It's terrifying. And I think the bigger thing is as well, there's 8 UK schools at the moment that are trialling the Internet of Things. And the idea of the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, is that every single item, including us, has our own Internet Protocol address, an IP address. And everything is monitored. The interaction between yourself and the fridge and the coffee you drink and Tesco's and whatever big supermarket, and they will instantly know what you're out of. And it's all about profiling. But the thing that really concerns me, as it did with the biometrics, is the privacy of the next generation is gradually being eroded. And in order for there to be a healthy democracy, you need privacy. Otherwise, how can anybody protest? We end up being, like China, where people just disappear, because if you're not towing the line or doing the right actions, which of course the Internet of Everything or the Internet of Things will throw up anomalies. What happens? Do you just disappear? Do you get talked to? Do you go on a course because you're not thinking, as you should be doing? Where is all this going? And another thing that's sort of to do with the whole surveillance network and the Internet of Things is the fact that in 2016 our UK civilian airspace opens up to drones. So you don't have to apply to the Civil Aviation Authority for licence anymore for drones. I think you can probably just put them up there. So CCTV or IPTV, which is all sort of remote based anyway, is going to be everywhere. This fast, ubiquitous society of all seeing this, I think, is what the next generation is being groomed for. I mean, this Internet of Things that's being trialled in 8 schools it's not being trialled; it's being piloted with a view to rolling it out. That's sort of a decision that's already been made. So all they're doing is sort of test running it until next July or this July, and we'll see where it goes from there.
You sent me that article that came through on the Telegraph about the 8 schools, and I completely agree with you, Pippa. It is just conditioning the children that it's okay to be spied on and okay to be watched all the time.
Well, the lie, of course, is always that
safety.
It's for safety. It's safety. How did children go out and play 20, 40, 50 years ago? Now you're only safe if you're being tracked.
Exactly.
Should we just put up this? We've only got a copy of this. But,
the slide here. This is this big event, and it's they're making it sound so exciting, Pippa. CES Las Vegas 2014, all the biggest trends, and there it is, the Internet of Everything. And as you quite rightly said, it will be hooking up. I mean, I believe you can even send a message to your boiler, because they'll be all attached to smart meters, telling the boiler to turn on, ready for when you get home, so the house is nice and warm. Is that right, Pippa?
Yes, I mean, I don't know if you watch television, but I caught there was an advert called Hive that was saying it was easier to sort of control the whole of the heating of your house if you do it remotely. And quite frankly, I've got better things to do. My central heating works absolutely fine. I don't need to remotely control it from my smartphone. But that's the way it's going. Really, but sort of going back to the safety aspect, they had been tagging the kids in the United States with RFID without controversy. And so after Sandy Hook had happened, there's companies that have come in to schools selling it on the safety issue, and they're doing what they call RFID over Wi-Fi. So they, as you said earlier, Lou, they're tagging seniors or old age pensioners in care homes with these wristbands. They're on about it for small kids, and this is what they're doing in the high schools in the States with the teachers, because they've got alarms on, and they're sort of selling it on the back of Sandy Hook. Yeah. And some states that aren't even using RFID in schools have actually already passed legislation to say it's okay to do this, even before it's happened. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in the UK schools, because schools are sort of a tiny authority in their own right. They're not answerable to local authorities particularly, or even to the government. Unless you start sending out vast amounts of Freedom of Information Acts, we don't know what's going on in the schools at all. And this is what I had to do with biometrics, because there's no record of the technology that the schools are using other than in that individual school. Yeah. So it's very difficult to see what's going on. And, children are exposed to this technology right from being in the cot. You can get baby monitors and television remote controls, mobile telephones, all sorts of different technology. And it's being able to discern at what point is it sort of encroaching too much on their privacy. A remote control has a function, looks like a phone, but they have different roles in life, don't they? And I think, just it's very easy with the next generation for them to be accepting to things like biometrics and RFID, because they're not always told the bigger picture, of course, in the schools of where the information can go. And I think if you look at something like biometrics or RFID, when you look at it in a school and it's compartmentalised, it's so you should think, well, okay, it can't do any harm, but actually with sort of 3-4 million children's fingerprints on school computers, where can that information go? How do we know where it's going?
Exactly.
Government have not got a good track record. You know, we've only got the school's word for it, and now big corporations are sort of getting in with, you know, public-private partnerships and building schools for the future. It's all information, and data is worth money. And I think, you know, in a decade or 2 or 3, the sophistication of the computers in the future is going to make what we've got now look like bits of Lego. You just can't be too careful, I think. You know, keeping as much data off systems like that is most prudent, I think, for any child or human, really.
Yeah, Pippa, Mike's here and he just wants to ask a question.
I was just interested, because Malcolm and I were speaking the other day about what the best way to deal with this problem is. And I'm just interested in your view of this because, you know, 2 main approaches. One is to try to avoid the system, which I don't think is really possible because it's all pervading at the moment. And you know, if you're going to use the internet at all, you're basically being tracked in everything that you do. I mean, you can really jump through some major hoops perhaps and go part of the way to avoiding it. But it seems to me the better approach might be to try to poison the database. And I'm just interested in your view of that.
I think, you know, if everybody refused to use these systems, they wouldn't work. But that's not going to be the case because they're convenient and it's just how our society is going. The people that will hack those databases will be the children. And when we were campaigning against biometrics in schools, there was a college in Cambridge, I think, sixth form college, where precisely that had happened. And I think that may be the way it goes. You know, there are children who don't like it. The vast majority don't think about it until you point it out to them, and then they start to think. But there are many children that are not happy about it at all. So I think if anything like that happens, it'll come from that generation, personally.
Exactly. We've only got a bit of time. I mean, what do you think that everyone can do to start to combat this? I mean, you've already said that everyone turns it down. But sometimes you're in a position where it's very difficult to, especially for things like the smart meters on the side of the houses. If you're living in rented accommodation, you can't. I mean, what can people to start to do to make to show people that there is a problem here?
I think the basic thing is to arm yourself with knowledge. Read up about these things, talk to your neighbours about these things. You've got a piece of plastic that's hanging around a child's neck, ask them what it's for, ask the school what it's for, because this is a hidden technology. It's all invisible frequency. And it's, apart from all the civil liberties and privacy issues it brings with it, there's also a massive whole massive health issue that really hasn't been dealt with yet, and whether this sort of frequency that we're all bathing in becomes the next asbestos or smoking in the next sort of 2 or 3 decades, I don't know. But I think educating yourself, and while we've got the option to refuse things like biometrics in schools, you know, take the tag off, you know, or ask what it's about, you know, don't have a smart meter fitted because it's not law yet that you must. So I think just educating yourself and seeing what's around you and asking and talking to other people.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, Pip, what we'd like to do is we'd like to do a whole more detailed programme, either maybe one evening programme we can do, you and I can do together. Would you be all right to come back on again shortly? Because of our technical issues, we've had to cut you short a little bit. Is that all right, Pippa? Would you come back on again?
Yes, thank you, Lou. That would be great.
Oh, fantastic. And your websites are, I think we've just got them here, actually. Have you got to put them up, Mike? Biometrics in schools, that's just focusing on the whole school issue there. And then the other one is against RFIDs in schools. So I urge people to go and check them out. There's a wealth of information there, really crucial information. So Pippa King, thanks so much, and we will speak again soon.
Thank you very much, Lou.
Cheers, Pippa. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, there we have it. I'm sorry it was a little bit of a disjointed programme today, but we made it in the end. And of course, we're seeing that last interview. There are lots of really good people out there doing tremendous hard work to get the information out. Please help us to spread it. If you like what we're doing, perhaps you would encourage other people to sign up and make a donation, whatever it is, to the UK column. But we will be back tomorrow, having trouble with my words now, at the same time, 1 o'clock.
Monthly meet-up tonight, 7:30, the George.
No. Monthly meet-up tomorrow night.
Oh, yes, tomorrow. Sorry, I
we
don't
are.
even know what day of the week it is.
Tonight is the Health Revolution. Clive will be back tonight at 9 o'clock on the UK Column website. Okay.
Lovely.
All right. We got there in the end. We're having a bad day today. Not to worry. All right.
Tomorrow.
Thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.